Welcome to everybody just joining us. We're going to begin in just a moment. Just bear with us as we allow everybody some time to make their way in from the waiting room, and we'll start very shortly. Okay. Well, thank you to everybody for joining us today for our virtual talk. I just want to remind everyone to keep themselves muted throughout the presentation, except for today, we have something a little bit different that we're going to try, and we have some questions that we're going to be posing, discussion questions we'll be posing throughout the presentation. And then we'll also have a moment to stop and discuss those questions. So at that point, we welcome everybody to at any point of the presentation, you can type in the chat, but at that point, we also welcome you to unmute yourselves and discuss. And if you are on Facebook Live, you can also participate in that discussion by using the chat feature on Facebook Live, and that will be relayed to us as well. And we will post those questions that you ask or relay your comments for you. So moving on, I want to make sure everybody knows that this talk is being recorded and streamed live and will be posted to our social media channels once the talk is over. If you'd like to rewatch this talk or watch previous virtual talks, you can check out our YouTube or our Facebook pages. So with that, I'm excited to introduce to you our speaker today, Barbara. Her talk is entitled Probing American Still Life Painting. So I will turn it over to you now, Barbara.
Thanks so much, Blythe. Welcome again, everyone. And our topic is a little different, Probing American Still Life Paintings. And Blythe already went over the new format, and I'll explain it via the slides as we proceed here. The next slide shows the two of the research books that I predominantly used. Obviously, there's other research or known entities that I used, but these two were more recent. And on Raphaelle Peale, this is a book by Alexander Nemirov, The Body of Raphaelle Peale, Still Life and Selfhood. And it encompassed those years of his life, and it was just published in 2001. And the second book for the latter part of my presentation is called Martin Johnson Heade, and Theodore Stebbins did that one, and he's a pretty well-known art historian, so I'm sure some of you are familiar with his work. Predominantly, he's done a lot on Heade. So now moving forward, we're going to do Raphaelle Peale first as an American still life painter. And he was born just before 1776, as you can see from a vantage point here, and lived until 1825. Now, as we look at three of his still life paintings, I would like you to ponder this question. And if in the process you can answer that, if you can put it in the chat room, or if you think of something in our brief discussion of this question, we can certainly unmute you also. And the question that will be posed for his three are, how does Peale connect us to still life paintings? So we'll look at that. Now, one thing before we move on, I want to say about Peale. Peale, when he did still life paintings, it was not a style of painting that was done. It was really at the bottom of the hierarchy of painting subjects, but he ignored that and went ahead, and he's really now considered the first professional American still life painter, and he's the practitioner of that genre. And so that was interesting to learn about that being relegated to the bottom of the barrel, but he did it anyway. So moving on, a little bit about his life now. This painting of him was actually done by his father. His father, as some of you know, I'm sure, was Charles Wilson Peale. He and his brother, James Peale, were the father and the uncle of Raphaelle. Now, what is interesting about this artistically prone family is Charles named his children after famous, mostly artists. And Raphaelle had brothers named Rembrandt, Titian, and the third one, Rubens. So, and the one, many of them did not survive, but Raphaelle was the oldest son to survive, and the other one that he did some collaboration with in his life and art was was Rembrandt. So the two R brothers are the two that work together a little bit. And this is considered a miniature portrait, a miniature because the size is small. Miniatures are usually about 25 inches square feet, and this is an oval, so it would come somewhere in that realm. We could not find the exact size of this painting, but we did find that it was a miniature done by his dad. So it looks like it might have even been a pendant size or something like that. Now, the other result, he studied initially with his father, Charles, with whom he also collaborated with portraits. And then Raphaelle on his own took trips to other places. He was from Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, and he would visit other parts of the East Coast, which was, of course, what was known at that time. But he also traveled to Rome, and he traveled to other places in Europe, but primarily England. And so he gleaned some of what was going on in art there. But after a year or two of any travels, he always returned back to their studios. And their studios were both in Pennsylvania and in New York. So he chose to paint still life with this. I'm going to read this now from the book about him. That I mentioned a couple of slides ago, The Body of Raphaelle Peale. And I think I'll read this quote directly from Nemiroff. Choosing to paint still life around 1800 is when he did. He did it with a seriousness of calling and professionalism that he then brought that seriousness to the subject. And it became, in that era, really extreme art. It was not well accepted by people during his lifetime. It was a deliberate, relatively sudden, radical inversion of the artistic order in which a subject, as I already said, long relegated to the bottom of the artistic scale, was raised to the top by Raphaelle. This reclassification gave then new significance to still life painting, and it was a reclassification of art, really. The other thing that I recall him saying is the subject matter of his still lifes, and we'll look at 3 of them momentarily, were taken from ordinary life. And that was also new. Art up until this time, and especially certainly not in America, but in the New World, in the old world, so to speak, was art that was for the upper classes, because they were the people who could afford it. They had the artwork in their homes, or they had artwork that they witnessed in their churches and cathedrals. But this was a change because of the topics that he used. And that went along with what was occurring in this new America after the Revolutionary War, that all the classes of people changed. It wasn't just an upper and a lower class, but the middle class was beginning to emerge. And then they could enjoy that art. Now, the first work of art that we're going to look at of his, Blythe, is, you can see the title here, A Still Life with Orange and Book. And he did this in 1815. And I already mentioned that He was born in 1774, and he began still life paintings in the early 1800s. So those that I'm using today are done all within this time of the teens of the 1800s. And that seems to be predominantly where a lot of his work did come in. He died in the 1820s, so he was doing this at the end of his shorter life. Now, before I talk about the picture more specifically, notice that Blythe has put for us the question at the bottom of the screen here. How does Peale connect us to still life paintings? And just so that we remember that question, we've reiterated that on each of the subsequent slides of his paintings. This one just truly fascinated me when I saw it. It's owned by the Philadelphia Museum of Art, but the juxtaposition here of that orange with the book really piqued my interest. So when I saw it, I thought, I have got to learn more about this painting and see why in the world he would put an orange on a book. And first of all, if we look at it, we have this orange that's partly peeled, and half of that orange, which is very round, is sitting atop the book. But the rind of it and the peeling, it kind of curls around the book almost like a snake. And then the replication of the beginning of that rind almost is a balance with the orange. They're both those roundels, so to speak. Now, we can't help, as we look at this, being struck by the juxtaposition here. An orange atop a book. Why would he have ever done that? Well, let's take a moment here to scrutinize why he would have. It becomes clear to the viewer that this is not merely a decorative painting that someone would put up on their wall. It's one that you really think about it, because it's for a still life, which is a replication of reality. How many people put oranges on books, especially open oranges like this? So he's making a point here. And what researchers believe and as they studied his life, and he was really getting into the democracy that was new into our country, his point here is perhaps when we look at something as humble as an orange that we see in everyday life, it's symbolic of the fact that maybe we can get as much wisdom from ordinary items as we do from the biggest books we could ever read. So that is what historians believe is the meaning behind what he did here. Oranges appear, certainly in this one, but they appear a lot in his still lifes. And so the question then is, why did he choose an orange so predominantly? And again, researchers believe apples were pretty prevalent. People already had apple trees growing, but oranges were tropical. There wasn't a Florida that had all the oranges growing and it would ship up to the north. Oranges were found really in islands and not necessarily yet in the Americas, or at least not prevalently. So it was considered a unique fruit yet, even though he was trying to uplift it to its normalness here. So now Peale's works are often combinations of edibles. He used a lot of fruit, and I said predominantly oranges, but he used meats and vegetables as well. And the objects, before we move on, are always placed on some type of ledge. And here we look at whatever that book is sitting on. It's a ledge of some sort. Is it a shelf? Is it a table? It almost doesn't make any difference, because he used that device in all of his paintings of still lifes. His backgrounds are always neutral. Either they're all dark or they're divided, dark with an area of lightness and with very little space between them. And we see that so predominantly. Look to where 2 o'clock would be, kind of in the upper right-hand corner. And you can see that faint line where the dark becomes the light, but it's not just an abrupt line. It smooths in there. And he's obviously emphasizing his objects there. The other thing, we look at this orange, it's in a prime state of condition. Maybe a little, with a little suggestion of aging and geometrically perfect on this, with this round half orange. It's a perfect circle, and I already mentioned that it's repeated in the oval aspect of the last part of the rind. Now, most of Peale's paintings are small in scale. This one is only 19 or 9 by 13 inches, and they have only a few objects, and they're usually foodstuffs. And that's exactly what this one depicts. The next one is our Timken's Peale. And many of us recognize this right away. It's the cutlet and vegetables. And the Timken acquired this as recently as the year 2000. And we're lucky to have it because it's only one of 2 known paintings that the artist did of meat and vegetables. And this one is considered his largest. Those centimeters, the size of that is approximately 18 by 24 inches. And that is his largest still life. And we have it at our Timken. So now something, I'm trying to pinpoint things in this painting that maybe we haven't heard yet because it's at the Timken and many of us know of it. I mean, obviously what we see here is this big piece of meat, but it's an obsolete cut of bacon actually, and it's ready for the pot with its sprig of thyme at the bottom. There is a scallion tucked under the bottom, a head of lettuce in the back right, and then in the back left, a bunch of pale asparagus. So precision was used in capturing the texture, the muscles, and the bone of that meat. And that is, again, a juxtaposition. It's juxtapositioned with the translucent of the vegetables. The vegetables, maybe the lettuce not as much, but it's still not, it's considered translucent, especially that asparagus and the onion that we can see a little bit of on the bottom. Now, the meat is centered in the painting and it has a presence. That is what Peale obviously wanted to emphasize. And I found what I'm going to tell you so interesting that a researcher believes about this book, not the book, but about in his book, he believes this about the meat. He believes that the meat is almost a presence of its own, a subject that looks back at us as we look at the meat with all of its parts. The other interesting thing about that meat is that Peale had an interest in the butchered animal because he had an interest simultaneously with the rise of science in the medical world. So the medical world was discovering our bodies and everything that, we look like on the inside. And he was always reading about that. And so they believe that's depicted in this painting here that he was able to do. Now, there is an art historian that I have not gotten his book, and he's called Mark Simpson. And he said this about this particular painting that we have at the Timken. He believes that it's the artist's most ambitious still life because of what he did here. So that is an interesting phenomenon. Now we'll continue to consider the question, how does Peale connect us to his still life paintings in the last one we're going to look at? This one is at the Art Institute of Chicago. And I'm from that area, so I'm pretty familiar with that museum and what it has, but I never, ever spent very much time, maybe once, in their art gallery that encompassed American art. But I went to that specifically this time because I wanted to see what Chicago had in the Art Institute, that we might also have the same artist at the Timken, and there were several. This, and also I did the same thing with Heade. I saw this and I thought, you know, there's some familiarity because of the background with the dark and the kind of the light on the corner. So I was drawn to it. And sure enough, it was a Raphaelle Peale's work. And it was done also oil on a wood panel, and all of his still lifes, it was his choice. Apparently he did them oil on wood panel. And that centimeters, again, I tried to convert it for us. It's approximately 16 by 22. So it's a little bit smaller than the one we own, but it has quite a bit in it. Now, strawberries, nuts, and C. The C stands for crockery, which is the dishes basically that we see in that picture. And this was done in 1822. So the previous ones we looked at were 1815, 1816, and this is 1822. And he passed away in 1825. So it's certainly near the end of his life. And I love it that he just kept working along and right until the end here. Now, I want to say a little bit about this painting because it is unique. It's characterized overall with crisp forms within serenely balanced motif here. Now, this painting shows something very different. And I think, did it disappear, Blanche? There it is. There is on the left, we have the sugar bowl, and the sugar bowl is porcelain from China, which was pretty prevalent in that era. And it has this roundel on it. And that piqued my interest because you can't see that in any of his other still lifes. So let me explain this a little bit. The scene shows a subject that was very popular on the Chinese porcelain of the era. It's an allegorical figure, and it's a woman, and her name is Hope, and she's with an anchor and a dog. She holds a tender from which fly two birds, and those two birds, researchers believe, echo those two ships in the harbor. Now, you can't see it clearly on the bigger painting, but that's why Blythe was kind enough to do this for us. We can see those two ships in the harbor on the small aspect of it that she did do for us. Now, the other thing about it, all of his paintings try to subdue their horizons. In still life and with strawberries, nuts, and crockery, the distant edge of the table-like surface at the right repeats the horizon within the roundel scene. So he balanced it that well. The ledge itself is not just in the roundel, but it indicates the dispersal of nearness to us. So with that aspect, I'm going to skip a few of the specifics here just to make sure we have enough time for answering the question and to move on. As we look at that picture, so it's strawberries in the container in the back, the nuts in that beautiful bowl, again, an orange, which I said he liked to use in a lot of paintings. We have coming out, apparently those, I thought, at first it wasn't nuts, but I think it's the nuts coming off the side there also. And we have the creamer bowl, and then obviously the roundel is on the sugar bowl on the left. Just a beautiful painting. And the background, the dark with the light, is similar to the others, but the light on this one is not as predominant in the background as it is on the, I think on the, basically it's on the crockery more than anything. So it was fascinating. So Raphaelle Peale realized that objects also have their own horizons, and thus the boundedness of each thing he painted required him to address and solve a recurring problem of loss. Now that came from the book about him, The Body of Raphaelle Peale, and this Mr. Nemiroff, who wrote it, did so much research on Peale's works here. Now, the next slide is our summary slide. Now, we have the three paintings that we looked at this morning in the order, basically, of that we used to look at them. Now, does anybody have any comment to my question? How does Peale connect us to his still life paintings? And Blythe, I'm going to turn it over to you because I think you can see that more than I can, and you can manipulate the unmuting better than I can.
Yeah, so at this point, I mean, if anybody wants to unmute themselves and talk, I don't need to unmute you. You can unmute yourself and chime in as you please. If you're more comfortable using the chat feature, I can also relay any questions or comments you have.
Well, this is Dee Dee Hollowell. I'm talking from North Carolina. I love this painting too. Hi, everybody. Just thank you very much for emphasizing Peale. He's somewhat, I think, under talked about. I don't know if I got this from our learning as docents or whether I read it somewhere else. What I heard was his father was less than pleased with his choice of subject matter, as the speaker was saying, Barbara was saying, that it's the low end of the totem pole on subjects at the time. But I also read or heard that he had been, the uncle had an engraving shop, and that there was acids used in the engravings on metal that he was doing and had taught him to do. And that they think one of the reasons he died so young is that the inhalation of these fumes affected his brain, and so that led to his early death. But I think he would have been phenomenally sensitive to look at these paintings all together, and of course especially the meat thing. But we're human; we need to eat. These are humble things. He's not messing around in the stratosphere. It's down here on Earth, and I just find it fascinating. I'm glad that this has been done today. Thank you.
And Dee Dee, I did come across the same thing about his father not being pleased. I just didn't include it because I had so much material. But what you said about the engraving and the fumes, I wondered why he didn't live longer. And that does, I hadn't heard that. So thanks for sharing that.
I would treat him like a sensitive, super sensitive soul, a poet that sees into the deepness of things, So thank you.
And what is so interesting now is we're talking about Raphael's works. We're not really talking as much in the art world as much about his dad, Charles Wilson, or even his uncle, James. They were, I think, more known during their life, but it was Raphaelle who's really moved on. And we have his paintings all over the country now.
Ironic, yes.
Yeah. Okay, Blythe, are there any others, or maybe we can move on here?
Yeah, I don't see anything in the chat right now. So I think we can move on, but if anybody has anything that they want to add in about this conversation, feel free to put it in the chat and we'll get to it at the end as well.
Yeah, and I think my questions were meant for anybody who wanted to share, but also self-reflection. You know, I think as I thought of it, I was answering that question to myself all the time when I learned about what he did with these paintings. So thanks. And so transitioning to the next one, I have a quote by David Nelson Perkins, and he has a book called The Intelligent Eye, Learning to Think by Looking at Art. And in this book, I found this: artists strive to express not just the anatomy of bodies, but the anatomy of the human condition that impinges upon it. And boy, if that isn't what happens to us as we think about the art that we see. So there we go. So now my next artist is going to be Martin Johnson Heade. And again, many of you are familiar with him as a still life painter. He was born a few years before Peale passed away, so they kind of crossed over a little bit, but he lived until 1904. And as we ponder him and his works, I have another question. What's surprising about his still life paintings? So hopefully we'll have a couple people who are willing to share their thoughts on that question. So moving on to the next slide about Martin Johnson Heade. Now, I researched this painting and it's unattributed. I looked in so many sources and I could not find who painted this or the year, but we do know that it's a relatively small painting. Another one like that done, you know, that was popular. These miniatures were popular in the era. So I don't know, Blythe found this for me. Did you happen to see that they attributed a painter to this? Blythe? Oh, I think she's.
Sorry, I was having trouble finding the unmute.
Oh, that's right. I don't know.
No, I think I could be wrong. It might be a photograph. I can't remember it. I can't remember honestly. But
I looked it up and it just said unattributed. So, you know, different researchers and different publishers have, sometimes they don't always have the same answer. Yeah. So I thought, well, maybe you knew something I hadn't.
No, I hadn't found it. It was just one of I chose it. It was one of the clearest images of him that I could find.
And I really appreciate it. And he looks like he's getting a little bit older there. I found one that was when he was younger, and his hairline was already receding when he was young, and he was heavier when he was young. His face on the younger picture was rounder. So different to a lot of men who age, who seem to get larger. This man seemed to have gotten thinner. So there you have it. But his, I could tell it was him. The features were there. So thanks so much. Now he was born in Pennsylvania, and his father had a little bit of art background, but not a lot. And his father got him going in the movement. And he's a central figure, actually, which is different than Peale was, in the American Luminist movement, and because of his pairing everything he did with light, and we'll see that in his paintings. Now, I'm going to try to skip a lot. He went here, went there, because I really want to get to his paintings. He did not start off initially doing still lifes. He started off under the tutelage of people that he encountered in his world by doing portraits, and basically these miniatures again. They were not real large portraits. And then through his travels, he saw so much, and what really, really interested him were the salt marshes that are off the coast of Massachusetts. They are, if you ever have a chance to look those up, they're just gorgeous. And I really wanted to incorporate one, but I thought, no, this topic is still life. I won't do it, but I couldn't help but want to tell you about them, because I think his interest in grandiose landscape and then his ability to paint with specificity, you can see how it led to still lifes. He went from the broad to more the narrow. And I love that about him and what he did. So he was born in 1819. He started, like a lot of them did in that era, in his late teens, pursuing art. And it wasn't until about the middle of the 1860s so he would have been 1819 he was born. He would have been in his middle 40s and already painting at least 20-25 years, the portraits and then the landscapes, and now he's on the still lifes. And he especially painted flowers, and roses were his favorite, and then he liked apple blossoms, and he loved magnolias. And we'll see some of that in a few moments. And his interest in this continued the rest of his life, and especially the last 20 years. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So as we move on to the next one, here it is. So the first still life is using the apple blossoms that I mentioned. And the apple blossom one here is done in 1871. So it was done a few years after he started. And I put it back in inches here. So this one is 14 by 18 inches. And it says at the top it was done in 1871, but either Blythe or I noticed as we're researching it, it couldn't be specifically pinpointed. It was done somewhere within those 4 years that you can see on the side of the painting itself. So other researchers or other art historians must have just given it the first year, but it's like, who cares? It was done in that era, and we see that he did it then. So I just love this one. And he did many of apple blossoms with this hummingbird. In fact, I was sharing with Blythe and Christina before we began that some of the titles they were confusing me when I kept looking it up. There's one that's entitled Hummingbird and Apple Blossom. And so I don't know if he entitled them or maybe somebody after his death did, but they're very similar in their names. So now he favored the rose and he favored magnolias, but he was, researchers said he's also, as I already said, partial to these apple blossoms. He painted 25 still lifes with apple blossoms, and that's just a drop in the bucket of all the still lifes that he did do. This painting, by the way, is at the Addison Gallery of American Art in Massachusetts, and they have had that since 1945. And I think that year is very interesting in which they acquired it. And I'll tell you why. Heade was not recognized when he lived for his art. I mean, he was relegated him to the B team, I guess. But what was interesting is that he was discovered around World War II by an American and I can't tell you right now who it was. So the fact that this museum in Massachusetts got one of these paintings in that era makes sense, because at first it piqued my interest that it was acquired right after the war, and it was that same time. So from the time he passed away in 1904 until 1945, he was basically out of anybody's realm until then. And boy, he's zooming now. And I'll tell you more so about that as we move on. So in this painting, which was done in 1871, a correspondent for the New York Evening Post said this about this painting. Mr. Heade is painting, among other flower subjects, a study of apple blossoms, with hummingbirds perched upon the branches among them. He is devoting the most careful attention to its elaboration and its finish. Now I'm going to add in this painting, you can see the hummingbird down toward the bottom on the bottom branch on the right, but the left part of that main branch. He's perched on a lower branch, silhouetted against the sky. The blossoms appear freshly studied, they're fresh, and the hummingbird is, I'm sure, in his glory because they're so fresh. And they have a light, airy appearance against the thick shroud of storm clouds in the background. So the illumination, he was a luminist, and you can see the light coming through those storm clouds, but look at the light on those apple blossoms. And also the light of, I believe that's called the red-necked hummingbird. I'm just doing that from my own memory. So if anybody knows a different name for that hummingbird when we discuss, feel free to add it. But that is the hummingbird picture there. The critic, Henry Tuckerman, captured the essence of the apple blossom within still lifes when he wrote, Mr. Heade embodied the very soul of spring and the tenderness in the apple blossoms and how could he have taken something as simple as apple blossoms of an object, and he could make it so beautiful and so suggestive. And they give the very keynote of the season of spring. They sweetly hint not only an orchard, but a landscape. We seem to inhale their odor and see their pink and white flakes quiver in the breeze of a May day. And perhaps down beneath them is a newly sprung patch of green grass. So I thought that quote in particular captured it. Now, when he got older, in the ages of 60s, 70s, and into his 80s, he might have just sat back like a lot of retired or semi-retired people do. But oh no, he went to Florida because he got married later in life, and he took his new bride to Florida. And he was so taken aback with everything he found down there, especially the growth and the flowers and the landscape that he was newly privy to, including the fruit. Of the new flowers in Florida that interested him, the magnolia became his chief love. And the next painting will depict that. Now, I'm sure this is familiar to many of us, and this is the Timken's painting of the magnolia blossom. And the Timken, like the one we just discovered, this was one of the first, if not the first, acquisitions of the new Timken Museum that opened in the middle of the 60s. And it's featured in so many places at our museum. We're so fortunate to have this painting. I realize that more and more. Now, he painted pictures of magnolias in vases as a prelude to these that are lying flat. And the majority of his magnolia paintings, after a few in vases or vases, as some people like to say, are portrayed on velvet, I guess, to give it the richness and the beauty and the reverence that he wants to depict here. And always when he painted magnolias in these horizontal positions on velvet, the velvet is either red, brown, or blue. And we happen to have one here in red. In this particular painting that we own, he gives this voluptuous blossom an added note of luxury then by placing it this way. The flower, if you look closely, and the leaves are perfect. They're without the natural flaws that might mar their surfaces. I know that because we have had a magnolia tree. The color contrasts within the flower, the crisp edges of both the leaves and the petals and the realistic treatment of light give the forms a presence, and they heighten our sensuality and the sensuality of the flower itself. Now, what makes our Timken magnolia blossom special? It is, again, the balance between the pearly petals and the surrounding green and rust-colored leaves that surround what we see in the middle, all of which are set against that sumptuous fabric that is the red background, as we've already said. Heade sought this subtle vibration so that the ivory toned blossoms could take on a more three-dimensional appearance. A snapshot of a backyard blossom, perhaps, while satisfying in its own way, can't compare with what he did here in painting this particular image. In 1980, the researcher, art historian Barbara Novak said this: Heade's glossy flowers achieve the quality of becoming through their twisting linear gestures. She calls them gestures. Heade's smooth surfaces embalm his subjects, she said, in crystalline time. It's almost poetic what she said about it, but I thought it was very fitting to the elegance of this painting. Now, the last one we are going to look at, Blythe, is again from the Art Institute of Chicago. And when I was in that art gallery and I spotted this there, I knew exactly who had painted it. It's so similar, and yet I was excited to see one live with a different background. It is blue, and in a moment, I think Blythe is going to put up a smaller print that will emphasize the blue. It almost looks like a teal color here, and I like that too, because it's called Magnolias on Light Blue Velvet Cloth, and this one was done in 1890. So the others were that I showed you were 1888 was the one that we own, and previous to that, the Hummingbird was 1871. So I don't know if you're seeing a difference as in these years he was in Florida or not, but hopefully we're seeing a little bit. And again, we're looking at the question, what's surprising about Heade's still life paintings? Now it's again stretched out, but this time on a blue velvet cloth. And the curvaceous magnolia, I'm going to call it the curvaceous magnolia, is meticulously rendered in pale, subtle hues. And it's illuminated by a light so sharp that maybe the image even evokes a dream. The warm atmosphere that we're seeing is noticeable, as maybe we can almost smell what that magnolia and the beautiful scent of that magnolia would be. And the background is darker, it's brownish, and this time the light, as opposed to what Peale often put his light on the right, but it's the opposite here. We see the light coming from the left and really shining on the magnolias themselves. During these years when Heade was in Florida, he depicted the flowers of Florida, and his touch, researchers and historians believe, was surer than ever before in his life. Maybe he was happy to finally have settled on his own with his new bride in his declining years. Now, as we move on to the next slide, here we have the summary, and this is set up a little differently. On the bottom, a prelude to his still lifes in Florida are other still lifes, and certainly we have here apple blossoms and hummingbird. And then to the top right was the Timken one done next with the red velvet behind it and the brownish color with the light coming from the right on the top. And then lastly, we have the painting from the Art Institute of Chicago, which is Magnolias on light blue velvet cloth. Now, before I go into the answering of the question, I want to give you one further tidbit. I mentioned that Heade was discovered or rediscovered during World War II times in our country. He is so known now and revered. And some of you may know that in 2004, the United States Postal Service chose one of his paintings for a stamp. And I wish I could have found that stamp to show a picture, but I could not. Heade was honored with, this stamp, but it was not one of these paintings. On the stamp is a painting that has a very similar look and title to the Art Institute of Chicago's Magnolias on Light Blue Velvet. The one on the stamp was called Giant Magnolias on Blue Velvet Cloth. And that was done around the same time. It was done in 1890. It is at least attributed to 1890, which is the very same time he did the one that we spoke of last. So with that, let's now see if we have anybody who would like to ponder this question. What's surprising about Heade's still life paintings? I know we have more in the chat room this time.
Yeah, so we have a little bit in the chat room, maybe to get the conversation started. I'll read those out loud and that might spark some ideas that anybody wants to share. But Ava Jane said, what's surprising to me about Heade's Magnolias is the way he portrays the texture of the flower petals and leaves. And they also seem to glow with an inner light. And I definitely agree with that, especially on the leaves. How they really shine like he's put oil on them or something.
That's right. I appreciate that because that emphasizes that even more so. Thank you so much. Do you have more comments, Blythe, from chat room?
Yeah, I have a couple more comments, not specifically to this. We had Kathy, who mentioned that she thinks that the hummingbird, what might have been a ruby-throated hummingbird, which was one of the most common types of hummingbirds east of the Rockies in the USA and Canada. So it's an interesting.
I bet that's correct. There. I call it red-throated, but ruby is red. And I wasn't as familiar and I didn't catch it when in my research. So I really appreciate that. I think she's correct in that. So thank you.
And Ava Jane also, again, is mentioning the orchid paintings, which I haven't had a chance to look at myself, but I assume that they must be lovely if Ava doesn't want us to forget about them.
Yeah, and time-wise, we just could only do so much, and I think everybody realizes that. So are we ready for the next slide?
Yeah, if nobody else has any other comments, again, I think that this could be a really great opportunity to have a little bit of a discussion, but I also don't want to force anybody to say anything that they're not comfortable saying, but feel free to unmute yourself. Okay, well, we'll just move on and maybe you'll want to share at the end.
The first sentence to the little blurb that advertised today started the same way. Art builds bridges and art connects. It's not what we look at that matters, but it's what we see. And I think we all understand the meaning of that. I don't know if anybody wants to add to these words, which are my own, I guess. So. While we're ending it, I wanted Blythe to put up the two books again that I used and the next, in case anybody is interested in seeing them again or pursuing getting them yourself, but they're just actually beautiful books, especially Martin Johnson Heade. It could be easily a table, coffee table book. Both of them could. I did not know that the one on Peale had been done. So, and what the Peale one I could only get in hardback, but it's a large book, and the Martin Johnson Heade I got as a large paperback, so that kept the cost down a little bit. But so much is in them about both of these artists, and someday we could have a lecture just on one of them that encompasses so much more. But in these short online presentations, we only have so much time to tell you a little snippet, which is not much different than when we're in the museum, I guess. So, but who knows, another short talk might give a different snippet of these artists' lives. So with that, Blythe, I'm going to turn it over to you and what you need to do now.
Well, thank you so much for that wonderful talk, Barbara. It was really great learning about these two amazing artists. And we have another message in the chat from Ava Jane. Thank you so much, Ava Jane, for your participation here. She says, Ted Stebbins is the man who authenticated the Heade Foundation in Arlington, Massachusetts attic in 2006. It's a sunset landscape, but she does not know the name.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, that is quite interesting.
I can add only one little tiny footnote, which is, of course, you deliberately skipped all of his travels. We would never get through anything if we didn't have all the travels mentioned. But didn't he go to Brazil and painted the jungle and all of this business?
He did.
Yeah,
and I had it. You know what's interesting? I had it in my notes, and I thought I can't
skip it. No, you're right. Absolutely.
It's already almost noon now, and
yeah.
And we didn't know how much time we needed for answers to questions. So it was today was a little bit of a crapshoot time-wise. So
I think you did a great job. I wanted to say that I happened to visit Palm Beach, I think it was, a couple of 2-3 years back, and on the tour there was one of those grandiose Belle Epoque houses that were that's built there, not Mar-a-Lago. and it was just stuffed with absolutely to the rafters with gorgeous things from the Renaissance and this and that and the other, really, really rich people. And I went into one room and there must have been 10 Heades on the wall. I just was blown away, including the magnolias and everything else, plus a few of the Amazon pictures. But I think what happened with him once he went to live in Florida and with the world wars and all of that, as you said, he kind of lost to history and then rediscovered. But he clearly, as a local artist, probably was very prolific and kept on painting because people bought them.
I bet that was it. I think he may have done a little bit better in Florida, and I'd love to know, why did he move down there and leave his family? And I mean, he met this new woman in his life, and he was married later. So maybe Mr. Stebbins knows that answer, but I certainly don't.
I think maybe he fell in love with the jungly sort of vegetation after his trips, and Florida was much closer to what he loved.
Probably. It's interesting.
I want to just correct something Ava Jane in her quote or in her comment. I misspoke and read the comment wrong, and she actually said that he's the man who authenticated the Heade that was found in Arlington in an attic in 2006. So that's very interesting. And so I apologize for my, I read it wrong earlier.
Thank you.
So with that, oh, sorry, Barbara, you can.
I see there are other people in the chat, but you said they weren't necessarily pertinent to these questions. So it's not something to be read out loud, correct?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's the red-throated hummingbird. Ava also making the comment that there is definitely still life within his landscapes, which I think as we were putting this presentation together, you went back and forth between deciding whether or not to include the landscapes, and that was the kind of opinion I think you had on it as well, was that you definitely can find still life aspects within his landscape paintings, but ultimately you wanted to narrow it down and focus a little bit more on the pure still lifes here. So that was another comment made in that. Let me see, what is this saying? That if you want to read A Summer of Hummingbirds by Christopher Benfrey for more information about Heade in Florida. that's for you, Barbara. If you want to know why he went to Florida, that might be a good book for you.
That's good. Good. Thank you.
All right. Well, if you have any more last minute questions or comments, feel free to unmute yourself or type them in the chat. But I want to thank everybody again for joining us today, and to thank you, Barbara, for putting this beautiful presentation together for us and taking your time. And thanks everybody for taking your time to come and listen to our talks. If you liked this talk and you want to come back for more, we have them on Thursdays. So next week, Thursday at 11 a.m., we will have another docent giving another talk entitled Artists and Their Mentors. This is a part 2 to a talk that had been presented before. So it's a little bit different than the last one that she gave. So if you're interested in that, feel free to join us, I think using the same Zoom link next Thursday. So thank you, everybody. If there's no more last minute questions, we'll end it there.
And thank you, Blythe.
Nobody
ever thanks her, but believe me, she is really the one who helps us behind the scenes and will make slides for us if we want, and help organize. She is just a professional. So thank you so much, Blythe.
Oh, thank you, Barbara. You're too much. All right. Well, bye now, everybody. Have a good day.
Bye now. Thank you.